Hi, this is Rochelle with Live in Vibrancy, and today I want to talk about levels of consciousness. So this will be the first in a series I'm going to do based on a request I had in my Facebook group to make videos around embodiment work and to really talk about why it could be the missing key if you're struggling to manifest anything in your life. So I'm going to start this series discussing levels of consciousness. I feel like it's kind of a good lead in and gives you a bit of context when I start to talk about embodiment work. So because I'm sure that you've heard of the importance of mental diet, right? And you may have spent time unendingly flipping thoughts, only to find yourself kind of caught in a cycle or to feel like you're not really getting where you want to go with that. Or it might work for you, but maybe only temporarily or what have you. And so if this is you, then you're probably going to want to hit that little bell to be notified as I upload videos in this series so that you don't miss any. Because I'm going to go a lot deeper than the usual framework, which kind of sticks to what you're thinking. And so levels of consciousness in relationship to what you're thinking isn't wrong. What you think is really important. It profoundly affects what you create in your life. But if this were pie, thinking is just the crust. And so I've talked about the importance of not just flipping your thoughts to manage your mental diet, but to shift at the level of your perception. Because thoughts are the product of perception, and perception is the product of identity. And so if you want to improve your self-concept and manifest new things into your life, you want to be able to shift your perceptions and shift your energy. And I'm going to explain a little further in these two videos about the connection of perception and energy, because essentially, if you are caught in that sort of endless cycle of flipping your thoughts and you're not seeing the results that you want, or you're finding that you're continually changing them and the thoughts are continually coming back, it's literally the connection between thought and energy. And I'll go a little further in that a bit further in. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be like really opening the lens around levels of consciousness, because consciousness is more than just what you think. It's a state. And so often, not only is it just described as what you think, it's also, if you follow Dr. David Hawkins' work, it's also described in relationship to your emotional state. And so I'm going to really blend the two in these videos. So because essentially your state is about more than just what you're thinking. In fact, your thoughts can be completely incongruent with the rest of your being. So you can be basically, when you're creating, and this is what's happening, you're hitting the gas and you're hitting the brakes at the same time. And so I want to, so this first video is going to sort of lay the foundation and create a little bit of a framework. Because it's the most, the first level is the most limited, and we all slip into it at one point or not. And so, maybe not Eckhart Tolle, but at one point he was. So anyway, basically, we come into this world as pure, unaltered consciousness. If you look into the eyes of a newborn, it is like looking into the vast expanse of the universe. That their full awareness, all of their energy is in their tiny body. They're not like we are as adults with most of your energy and awareness up in your head. They are literally in their full body, and they are aware of everything without meaning and without separation. The analytical part of the brain doesn't develop until you're between 7 and 10. So a child is literally born without a reasoning mind, and they absorb everything through the nervous system. They're mentally and emotionally wide open and receptive. And in the same way that we feel one another and absorb one another's emotional state, right? We're essentially a bunch of fleshy tuning forks. Children's tendency to absorb the emotional responses of the people around them is really amplified by their absence of an analytical mind, because it's the analytical mind that essentially begins to create that sense of separation, or at least that sense of like a barrier to other people's experience. Not a very thick one, but a very Adults definitely take on other people's energy, but not to the extent that children do. And so the entire child is basically the subconscious mind. And so they begin to pick up the emotions of the people around them, and they begin to make emotional meanings about themselves. Because a child is internally focused and doesn't really have that developed analytical mind, they always make an intense emotion mean something about themselves. And so, because they don't really understand how the world works. And so, it's through this process, actually, that the ego, identity, and the shadow begin to form. And so most of the beliefs that limit you are essentially mental and emotional meanings that you have taken on, especially in your younger years. And most of them, they are not necessarily easily accessible to your conscious mind for various reasons. Sometimes you can go through the subconscious to find them, and then sometimes they're repressed. And so these mental and emotional meanings, particularly when they're limitations, are reinforced again and again and again through the feedback loop, right? Creating a pattern in your life. And so the more you're focused externally on the physical world, the more you reinforce these patterns, essentially intensifying them because of the feedback loop. So basically, every baby holds the potential for all possibility and all personality traits within themselves. You hold all traits within yourself. But through experience, you learn to express what you were conditioned to believe made you good and worthy of being loved. And in those cases, you would receive you would have your needs met. And so you learned to repress what you were conditioned to believe made you bad when those around you either withdrew love from you or didn't meet your needs or reprimanded you or what have you. And this is how you were conditioned into seeing the world through this lens of limitation. And so essentially you learned how the world works and what's possible for you. And all of it started being installed right from infancy, like programming a blank computer. I mean, human beings are essentially like a computer. And so without a full understanding of life, you would have made meanings about your experiences that now essentially serve as an invisible wall of a box that you live in. And the thing is, it's invisible. You can't see it. You're unaware, for the most part, that you're in it until you really begin to analyze your own lenses, your own view of the world. But I digress. So individualization is primarily an unconscious process of essentially assimilating the individual into the collective. And it's not good or bad. It's just really part of this like physical experience. And it's been necessary for human survival for millions of years. Because back when we really, and that is less the case in the last 100 years, but prior to that, we really needed to live in groups, and we really needed to essentially be assimilated in order to survive, because life is rough. The human, well, even the three-dimensional experience, it's not utopian. Anyway, so basically, this is essentially, all these instincts you have. They are essentially to keep you alive. They were to keep other human beings alive. And so individualization is essentially the manner through which infinite consciousness begins to identify with this physical experience and the limitations of the physical form. And essentially, if you follow some spirituality and some philosophy, you could say it is so that it can then rediscover itself. Some might call it awakening, some might call it enlightenment. Essentially, the idea is your only job in this life is to wake up to your true potential, is to expand beyond the limitations that you were conditioned into. And your desires are the bait to that. Everything that you want to manifest into this physical plane is essentially the carrot that's dangled to get you to expand beyond how you currently see yourself. As Alan Watts so eloquently put it, God playing hide and seek with itself. And so, what better way to forget that you are infinite awareness than to drop you as it directly into limitation and vulnerability, and then condition that being to believe in its own limitations. Infinite consciousness comes into this world in the most vulnerable form. Human children are helpless to the world in all senses, and the brain and the nervous system are highly impressionable. And so what started as infinite awareness begins to identify with self in the first level of consciousness. And so in my next video, I'm going to begin to break down the levels of consciousness and then talk about essentially not only what that looks like so that you can identify possibly where you are and maybe understand if you are struggling in some areas to recognize that this is a big factor, but also not just not just to identify the levels, but give you some ideas about how to begin to shift your levels of your level of consciousness. So I will see you in the next video.